only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good evening, good people. Thanks for joining me. Welcome to the Neil Oliver Show on GB News TV, radio and online. Tonight, investigative journalist, author and activist Derek Brose will be here to talk about the People's Reset, an event aimed at promoting regenerative culture. We'll also be joined by Colonel Douglas Macgregor to discuss recent developments in Ukraine, including Zelensky hitting out at Britain for the slowing of delivery of long-range missiles. And Dr. Ivor Cummins will be joining us to talk about what's grinding his gears, and I can kind of preempt that by saying it's basically what grinds my gears. All of that and more coming up, but first an update on the latest news.
Good evening. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Today marks 2 years since the passing of Britain's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. She was on the throne for 70 years and was beloved by the nation and around the world. Earlier today, the King and Queen attended Crathie Kirk Church near Balmoral, where the late Queen was a regular worshipper. They were there for a Sunday service with prayer and remembrance of his late mother, who passed at the age of 96. The Prime Minister has hit out at previous governments this morning, saying the NHS has been broken in ways that he called unforgivable. These comments come as a Labour-commissioned review into how children are treated by the NHS is due to be published in the coming week. Health Secretary Wes Streeting set out Labour's plan to tackle the NHS crisis.
Reform agenda is about three big shifts out of hospital into the community. So we get the GP appointments that people need, the social care that people need, care closer to people's homes, better for patients, better value for taxpayers. It's a shift from analogue to digital, so we're not working with outdated systems and allowing the waste in the NHS to go unchallenged. And then thirdly, from sickness to prevention, making sure we're supporting people not just to live longer, but to live well for longer through good public health and prevention measures. Those are the pillars of Labour's reform agenda.
Meanwhile, Shadow Health Secretary Victoria Atkins told GB News that she's concerned that Labour are using this report to cover their plans to increase taxes.
what concerns me about the way that Labour is seeking to report this report is that they seem to be chasing headlines. Lord Darzi is a very respected, eminent surgeon. Of course, he is also, it's fair to say, a former Labour minister and a former Labour peer. But this report should be about what the state of the NHS is and providing solutions. And what worries me is that Labour is using this report as cover for the tax rises they plan to raise on us all at the budget in October.
Now, a 15-year-old boy has died after having difficulty whilst in the water at an activity centre in Greater Manchester. Manchester Police says officers were called over concerns for a male in the water at Scotman's Flash in Wigan at around 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. He was recovered from the water by members of the public, but he died despite the best efforts of the emergency services. The force says there aren't believed to be any suspicious circumstances around that incident. And the King has sent his heartfelt congratulations to the Paralympian athletes from Great Britain and Northern Ireland and from across the whole Commonwealth ahead of tonight's closing ceremony. His Majesty added, "Your example has succeeded in inspiring, encouraging and lifting the hearts of all." Team GB have won a huge number of medals today, including in the kayaking, with a gold and silver in the women's 200 metres KL2, a gold in the women's 200 metres KL3 and a silver in the men's 200 metres VL3. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. I'm back in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
It occurred to me this week that I find it hard to remember my life of before, or more broadly, the way things used to be, and not so very long ago. So much has changed in 4 years, or rather so much change has been forced upon us and keeps coming. I think a lot about remembering and memory, how it's memory that enables us to know who we are when we wake up each morning. Remembrance is vital for individuals, but also nations. If we forget who we are, on account of dementia perhaps, or other neurological damage, then we're just bodies without identities. Something similar is true of nations, when they're stripped of the mythologies and traditions that are the national foundations. I say the nations of the West are being made to forget who they are, who they were, and that it's no accident. National personalities, what it has been to be British, what it has been to be French, what it has been to be American, Canadian, Australian, all of those national identities and more are being dissolved before our eyes. Or rather, I would say deliberately and malevolently dismantled by those who see the dissolution of identity, the onset of national forgetfulness, as steps towards something else they would prefer. Where there has been a presence, all too soon there will be only an absence instead. Look at Britain now, at other European countries besides. Look at the USA, Canada, France, and ask yourself if you still recognise those places. Ask yourself as well whether those places still recognise you, or in the manner of an elderly relative afflicted with dementia, have they forgotten you? When I say the changes are no accident, I think about how it has been accomplished. The truth is that the techniques have been used before, found to work, and are being used again. I get myself into trouble when I talk about the centralising of power, about globalism. Let's use another word instead. Collectivism, maybe. At the tail end of World War II, at the Yalta Conference in early 1945, US President Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill met with Joseph Stalin of the USSR and gave him, in effect, half of Europe. And in that Eastern Bloc, the consequences of collectivism came into their fullest flowering. Stalin's power to control the production and distribution of food made possible the Holodomor, the man-made famine that killed, or rather deliberately murdered, millions of Ukrainians and neighbouring Russians between 1932 and 1933. Ukraine, that benighted place, fought over and so tortured by Nazis and communists by one ideology or the other, ideologies that in truth you couldn't slip a cigarette paper between in terms of their consequences for populations living under either. The mass starvation was no mistake, no accidental misfortune born of hubris. It was made possible by collectivism. Stalin wanted rid of the Ukrainian peasantry, and control of the food supply gave him the means. He particularly loathed the so-called kulaks, those farmers a generation or so out of serfdom who had acquired a few fields, some livestock, maybe built a decent house. Kulak was a pejorative, a name meaning tight-fisted, part of a carefully choreographed campaign by which anyone with any kind of independence, and therefore any kind of resistance to the collectivism, was demonised and set up for being murdered. Food, every source of food, right down to the last seed, even the leaves on the trees, grass in the fields, was seized and taken from the countryside and into the cities. A systematic and ruthless denial of any and every form of sustenance to the rural population, applied by soldiers and activists returning again and again to every village, every house, ensured no one had anything to eat, nothing at all, not even worms or bugs scavenged from the soil. Broken and driven mad by hunger, people descended into madness, finally lay down and died in their millions. Some will say those days are in the past, that it's ancient history. They will insist there's no similarity between what happened in the second half of the 20th century in the countries under Stalin's thrall and 21st century centralising policies of progressives and so-called liberals. I say what happened before can happen again, the worst of times included, and if we don't waken up to the threat now, that it surely will. There's talk again of collectivising farming, plans afoot to seize farmland, forcing the farmers away and so taking control of food. I say the threat no longer comes from the east, but is homegrown, living right here in the form of those who treat the citizenry with out-and-out contempt, who work day and night to seize every last drop of control over our lives. Who would silence and even jail those with opinions that run against the mainstream? Who would tighten the stranglehold on freedom of speech? Who would leave the people, their own people, cold in their homes while funneling billions of pounds into profitable wars and proxy wars abroad, wealth shamelessly laundered back into the pockets of the rich? Who advocates for centralised digital currency, giving the state moment-by-moment control over what you can do, where you can go, what food you can buy? I said the centralising collectivist totalitarians of the Soviet saw to the dismantling and dissolving of national identities. I say it's the goal of all totalitarian regimes. We're invited to believe all that is behind us now, invited even to forget it ever happened, and yet the ideology walks among us to this day in different clothes with different acronyms, an ideology that is always anti-human, anti-family, anti the individual, anti-human. Part of the stripping of identity has been anti-Christian, anti-Christianity. Of that there can be no doubt. It's no recent phenomenon either. Early in the French Revolution, the land once known as the eldest daughter of the church, cathedrals and churches were destroyed by the revolutionaries, priests and nuns murdered. The so-called Festival of Reason saw the destruction of crosses, the mocking of Christian figures. Much of the same followed the Russian Revolution. Across Europe, for the past few centuries, there has been a unilateral disarmament of faith. Christianity ridiculed, driven out, abandoned. It continues to this day. Churches are burned to the ground in France, targeted by arsonists. It's been going on for years. Most recently, the 19th century church of Saint-Omer was gutted by a fire deliberately set. National identity is made of many elements, and the loss of each is telling, ultimately ruinous. A quote often attributed to G.K. Chesterton has it that when people stop believing in God, they don't then believe in nothing, but rather in anything. Loss of meaning in people's lives is endemic and has taken another toll on identity. Tyrants of old, like Henry VIII or Louis XIV, and then totalitarians like Stalin and Mao, had aspirations limited, at least to some extent, by their reach. All the secret police and citizen snitches in the USSR could not quite reach into the minds of every citizen. By now, the technology of the 21st century has overcome those limitations. Now those who crave total control of wealth, energy and food have the means at their disposal. Witness to the attitude of the World Economic Forum and the puppeticians in its thrall. Listen to their notion of you'll own nothing and be happy, and remember that collectivization under Stalin, under Mao in China, was about abolishing private property, making it impossible for a middle class to aspire to, far less achieve, any kind of independence from the state. By now, the education of children has been all but captured too. infected wherever possible with the nonsense doublespeak of critical race theory, gender studies, diversity, equality and inclusion. Always the claim is that such topics do not feature in the curriculum. But while the curriculum describes what is taught, what matters most is how it's taught. Conservative and Christian author and commentator Pete Hegseth has used the Greek word paideia to describe the enveloping atmosphere in which a child is taught, from which the child absorbs the abiding culture, just as the fish is enveloped by the water in which it swims and breathes. The all-conquering nature of progressive culture has all but rendered our schools and our universities into places not of education but of indoctrination. The indoctrination is all about pushing the cultural forgetting, the forgetting of the national identity of before, driving the cultural dementia. It's in this way that education too has been centralised as never before, and wisdom tells us that the pupils of today are the governments of tomorrow, brainwashed and ready to serve, and so perpetuate the ideology that indoctrinated them. Here's the thing, I miss the identity we used to have, the people we used to be, and I have not forgotten. I've not forgotten the thousands of years of history that got us here. I have not forgotten the good or the bad, horrors included. I've not forgotten the history or the traditions or the Christianity that underpins what used to be called Christendom. I'll always remember. I am joined by broadcaster, author and TV personality Ingrid Tarrant. Lovely to see you, Ingrid.
Oh, lovely to see you, Neil.
I do think what I'm experiencing this is partly because of how long it's been going on. But I catch myself sometimes remembering that in the not too distant past, everything was different.
Everything was different. But you know what's really frightening? It has been going on for a very long time, but it's crept in so under the radar that we haven't really noticed. And it's only when you look back, you look at now and then look back 40 years or something, and you think, oh my goodness, the change is dramatic, but it was done so slowly. It was happening in front of our eyes and we didn't see it. We weren't suspicious.
I was a combination of trusting, oblivious, and preoccupied with my own stuff. You know, I was, paying the bills.
That's it.
Looked
Makes
for the next
absolute
gig.
sense. So...
And I didn't look up until 2020.
But the trust, that's the word. It was the first word you used. It's the trust. You trust in the people guiding you, educating you, running the country, your doctors. It's only later on when that sort of trust starts to go away and you do have that chance to look back and realise, hello, this has been going on for an awful long time.
I think almost more than anything else, I'm shocked by America. Yeah, I mean, I grew up, obviously, immersed in American culture, music, Hollywood, television series, everything, clothes, the whole works. I watched The West Wing. I believed that if the Democrats were in the White House, all would be right with the world and all of that. And now I find that I look at America and I think, is that even the same country?
Yeah, it's not though, is it, at all? And, it goes back to the thing, it's sort of, if America sneezes, we catch a cold. It's always been like that. But now we're catching much more than a cold. We're catching a deadly flu, if you want to kind of move that analogy on. It has changed beyond recognition. But it's the power. It's the power that has been able, or for the people able to seize the power, because it's gone unstopped. It's gone unnoticed, and then suddenly they're there, and then they are in control.
And also the forgetfulness that I mentioned. We've seen, God help us, we've seen centralised power before. We've seen totalitarianism within the part of the 20th century.
Yeah,
that you
but
and
we
I
haven't experienced it though.
Haven't experienced it
We've
directly,
seen it from a distance.
But the lesson was there that if you allow the centralisation of power, then there are consequences, and they're almost invariably bad consequences. And yet we're watching the centralising of power again with
right
21st
under our
century
noses
tech.
this time. Yes. The worst thing is, Neil, it will never go back because the technology is there. You can't destroy it. With AI, it's going to advance even further, even quicker, and take away our liberties and the control that they have over us will be complete. Actually complete. I think that really isn't exaggerating.
I do feel that the nations have to remember. I mean, I can't think of anything anything positive to be had from a homogeneity around the world where everywhere is just a slice of the same. You know, I want all the differences, all the different identities, all the different cultures. You know, I want them all to be rubbing along.
Me too.
Together, but defined. You know, this is where this one stops. This is where something else begins, and that's okay.
And respect for those differences, because we don't have respect for those differences anymore either. We've lost that. So now it's just aggressive. We're not tolerant of other people's differences. We've just got to be in one great big melting pot and all think the same way, all have the same customs, cultures, eat the same food. But they're forcing that onto us, and I don't want that. I've just come back from Norway, so that's my homeland. And the difference there is extraordinary, and it's even more noticeable this year when I went back, because how quickly England has everything is disappearing in England. The British flag, you can't fly that. The St George's flag, you couldn't fly that. You could have the gay pride flags flying. I'm sorry, that is just nuts. But there's that national identity very strong. National pride with all the flags. Nobody is saying you can't fly the flag because that's offensive and you'll be upsetting the other people, the minorities and so on and so forth. There's very little evidence of you know, LGBTQ.
How is that being achieved? How you know, Norway is in population terms at least is a small country.
Yes.
How is that sustaining?
I think. I don't know, but part of it, I would imagine, is because they have controlled immigration. And the way that they've integrated the immigrants into society is very carefully and cleverly measured. So an immigrant or immigrants will go into like a rural village to start off with, not into the towns, because then they get lost, then they become kind of ghettoised. And they are absolutely, it's like the only gay in the village type of thing. So they are enveloped by the customs and cultures of the Norwegians, and therefore they grow with it. They get a job, they work within the community, they are respected because there's no threat to the people that live there and the residents. And then they get the job, they move on, then they move to the city, and by then they have an understanding of Norwegian culture and a respect for it. So there's a lot of respect.
It sounds so simple. When you
I know.
It doesn't sound difficult.
But I do think on a small scale, it's manageable. Here, it's not manageable.
It's the speed and the scale. I've got to go into a break, Ingrid. Bear with me. After the break, I'll be speaking with investigative journalist Derek Brose, talking about some of the same things, to be quite honest with you, about a people's reset. You're watching the Neil Oliver Show on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You'll relate to this one. We've all been there, haven't we? Tensions high in the car as you head off on the latest adventure or holiday during the summer break.
Now, with the average family set to spend about 3.5 hours a week together in the car driving on the roads during the holidays, new research has shown that our relationships could be tested to the limit.
Yes, figures show that 21% are having arguments for simple things like the driver going the wrong way, which we were saying is not actually very simple. That's very serious.
I was going to say that. I'm surprised it's just 21%. Yes. If I was going the wrong way down the road, road.
You'd know about
You'd
it.
hear from me.
A further 20% squabbling over how their partner drives, yes, and 25% admitting to being more prone to rowing when their kids are misbehaving. It's a lot to deal with, isn't it?
Fair enough.
Well, we're joined now by dating and relationship coach and author Persia Lawson. Good to see you this morning, Persia. What is it about being in a car that just makes things so tense?
Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? It's the fact that we are in a confined space, we can't go anywhere, and it can just really create so much tension and stress, especially if you and your other half or a family member, whoever you're in the car with, are going through a little bit of a tricky time. And if it's really hot outside, that doesn't help either. So inevitably, it creates a lot of irritation and bickering, I would say, from my experience.
And what is it about children? If you add children into the mix, it just makes things very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Kicking the back seat and just squabbles, kicking the siblings. So adding children into the mix is just going to turn the heat up on that tension.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. The People's Reset event is going to take place in Bath in the southwest of England at the end of the month. I'm going. It's an event that's of a certain type, really. 4 years into so much going on, rather than always just reiterating the problems and lamenting what's happened, there are more and more movements trying to look at the future, trying to come up with constructive solutions and alternatives. It's about regenerative culture, which is a movement based on ethics and principles that can create conditions for more life to exist, not less, more, and also finding ways for life to live in harmony with all other life. So with all of that in mind, I'm joined now by investigative journalist, author and activist Derek Brose. Are you there, Derek?
I'm here. Thank you for having me, Neil.
No, it's always a pleasure to see you there. As I say, it's about solutions, isn't it? We've kind of all had enough. You and I have spoken more than once. We have crossed paths. We've been at Bath before, doing one thing and another. And it's about looking for better ways, isn't it?
Yes, we're trying to focus on how we can build a better world rather than maybe always focusing on the problems.
And what is your, what kind of range of topics are we talking about? What kind of speakers are going to be there? Because the impression I get, I'm coming, and the impression I get is that it's people from all over with a whole spectrum of intentions and hopes.
Absolutely, Neil. We're really excited to have you speaking. So the event's called the People's Reset UK. This is actually our 6th event. We started it in North America, in Texas and Mexico. So we're bringing over speakers from North America. We're bringing speakers from across the UK, of course, and across Europe with a focus on 5 different themes: health, mental, physical, spiritual, growing your own food, permaculture, food independence, building parallel alternative systems like education models, using technology in a way that can protect our privacy and promote liberty, and how do we build and organize our communities in a free and conscious way. So we have 5 different themes. We have 24 speakers, dozens of workshops. The entire event will be streamed for free online at our website at thegreaterreset.org as well for those who can't make it in person, but we do still have tickets for people to come in person to hear you speak and to hear the other 24 speakers.
How difficult, or indeed how easy, is it to gather people together? Because it feels a lot of the time that there's a lot of pressure bearing down on everyone. There's a lot of negativity. So how easy is it to find and to gather speakers like these with this kind of motivation?
You know, it's a labor of love. We've been working on this. Our team's been working on this for about 6 months now. We pretty much started right after our last event in Mexico in January. But in terms of getting the folks at home to understand what we're doing, it can be a little bit of a challenge because, as you mentioned earlier, many people are so focused on the problems that we've seen during the last 4 years, what I call COVID 1984, and facing, what the governments were up to, which is important to dissect and to report on. But not so many people redirect their energy to focus on what we can do for ourselves. And that's what our entire movement is about, is how do we take our focus, our energy, our time, our money, etc., and not so much focus it on what quote unquote they are doing, but what we can do for ourselves for 2030 and beyond. Because the other side, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and some of these other organizations are very organized and highly coordinated, and they're constantly meeting and organizing. In fact, later this month, they're meeting for something called the Summit of the Future. And our gathering, the People's Reset, we're calling it our summit for our future. So it's very much a response to say, hey, those folks have their plans and that's fine, but why don't we focus on what we want to do for our future, for the coming generations, so we can leave behind a better world that does respect individual liberty, bodily autonomy, freedom of speech, and I think all these values that we care about.
Derek, my guest in the studio with me here in London, Ingrid Tarrant, is radiating the body language of someone who very much is interested in what you have to say. Ingrid, how do you react to an injection of positivity and alternative?
Oh, I can't tell you how good that feels, because individually, and we tend to find people who are like-minded in thinking and thought, word, deed. But when we're brought together and there's a catalyst like Derek is doing, I can't tell you how good that feels, because you aren't alone. And, we can build this better future all together. And how fabulous. Thank you, Derek. You're a leader. I love the idea. I'm coming, by the way.
Yes, we'd love to see you.
Derek, how much do you think movements like yours, opportunities like that which you are providing, annoy those who are organising things like a Summit for the Future? And after 4 years, there's more and more people, not less and less, more and more people who won't just roll over and accept whatever centralised, collectivised nonsense they're trying to push down our throats.
I think it annoys them quite a bit. Our movement is very much focused on, as I said, what we can do for ourselves. We're not a movement that believes violence is the answer. We don't really think the answers are going to come from politics. And we don't think that apathy and giving up is the answer. Instead, we think it's time for us to reclaim our own power, whether that's in the UK, Mexico, US, across Europe, Africa, wherever you're from. If everybody starts reclaiming their power, focusing on what we can do in our own local communities, I do believe it's inevitable that we will create a better world.
And you walk the walk. I mean, I know from experience of talking to you and spending time with you, but your life is shaped in this direction, day by day.
Yes, very much so. I personally, I don't use the big banks. I try to avoid what I call slavery systems that are going to lead to slavery and less liberty. Many people, I'm sure in your audience, are aware of the concerns, for example, around central bank digital currencies, concerns about digital identities, and how these things can lead to social credit scores, attempts to modify our behavior, attempts to limit our behavior, limit our movement. Of course, we saw much of this sort of tested out during the COVID years. And I think that the more proactive, the more forward-thinking we are, the less dependent we are on those systems, the better off we're going to be in the future. It doesn't mean that it's easy. I think we've been sold a lie that all we have to do is go vote or go protest or riot in the streets and everything's going to be better somehow. But in reality, the work that we're trying to do is it's a little more difficult. It's more time-consuming. It does involve potentially changing your life, changing your habits, your relationships. But I think if we are going to be the generation, which I say that from my age and my late 30s to the folks older than me and younger than me, that all of us collectively are, I believe we're here at this moment in time on the planet to be the ones to redirect the energy, because what I call the powers that wish they were, the powers that ought not be, they have their own visions, and it's time for us to reclaim that, as I said, and focus on what our 2030 and beyond looks like. And for me, it looks like being around like-minded people, focusing on individual liberty, focusing on growing good organic food, having clean water, clean air, and focusing on our energy on how we can come together, inspire each other, motivate each other. And, our event, the People's Reset, we actually call it an activation, not a conference, not a festival, because the goal is that everybody who comes in person or who watches online will go home feeling activated and motivated to take the ideas that they've heard and apply them to their lives.
Derek, you are an inspiration. I'm always minded to think of the character in Jurassic Park, Jeff Goldblum's character, who says life will find a way. And I think that though the powers ranged against us, forget that life will find a way. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in Bath. Derek Brose. Another break, after which Colonel Douglas Macgregor, former advisor to the White House, military man, will be with me to discuss recent developments in the war in Ukraine.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Low pressure has been in charge, bringing heavy rain and thunderstorms, some localised flooding. It does stay unsettled next week, but the winds turn to a northerly direction and it turns increasingly cold, particularly by the middle of the week. Low pressure at the moment, still giving outbreaks of heavy rain across southeast Scotland, northern England, down into Wales, parts of the Midlands as well. Thundery showers across the southeast. And as we head overnight, this all slowly pushes its way eastward. Still some heavy bursts of rain possible. Drier across Northern Ireland and Scotland with a few showers here. Under the clearest skies across Scotland, temperatures dipping into single figures. Elsewhere, under the cloud and rain, holding up around 12 to 14 Celsius. So much of England and Wales starting quite cloudy, outbreaks of rain, but clearer skies across Scotland. A few showers across the Highlands and Islands, but some bright spells elsewhere. Still some thicker cloud across the southeast with some patchy rain in places. Bright skies across Northern Ireland to start Monday morning, though rather cloudy across much of England. Those sunny spells starting to develop across Wales and the West Country first thing on Monday morning. And then through the day, the bright spells across the west just slowly start to push eastwards. It does mean, though, central eastern parts of England staying cloudiest for longest. The cloud thick enough for some outbreaks of rain at times. Sunny spells across northern England, Wales, the West Country, though starting to cloud over across Northern Ireland and Scotland, with rain arriving in the west later on in the day. Temperatures cooler for all, generally near average for the time of year, 16 to 18 Celsius, perhaps locally 20 towards the southeast. Turning more unsettled on Tuesday as a weather system pushes southeastward, some outbreaks of rain, showers following. The winds picking up, some strong and gusty winds across northern and western parts of the UK as well, and starting to feel colder. And that cold theme continues through the week ahead as well. Temperatures falling below average for the time of year. See you soon.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets and My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. On to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused the UK and the United States of America of slowing down deliveries of long-range missiles to Ukraine, whilst a top Ukrainian general has claimed that they have stopped Russia in the east. To pick up on all of this, I'm joined by retired US Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Are you there, Colonel?
Yes, I'm here, Neil.
It's always reassuring to see you. You and I have spoken on numerous occasions now about this ongoing conflict. We've predicted, or you've predicted, an imminent end. Where are we now? I suppose in short, what is happening today in Ukraine?
Well, we have at least 600,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers. You're watching somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500, maybe even 2,000 a day are being lost. The front, if you will, is collapsing. The war itself was lost a long time ago, but the Russians declined to advance, I think because they assumed there would be some negotiations. At this point, they know that's not going to happen. They're watching the Ukrainian government itself collapse. All of its ministers are finding someplace else to live, I suspect. And these sort of revenge weapons that we've been providing them with, now they're supposed to get a multiple launch rocket system, which is a very powerful system with great range. That's not going to change anything. If anything, it will probably hasten Ukraine's destruction, as the Russians are really preparing now for a much more serious advance. We know, for instance, that the Russians have now gotten down to the tactical level with their short-range ballistic missiles. These are the Iskanders. And the Iskander, until recently, you had to practically go to the front or theater level to get permission to use it. Now, generals that command brigades can actually use the Iskander missiles as they see fit, and that's what happened at Poltava recently. So I think the Russians know where everything is. I don't think they're worried about the MLRS, because as soon as they find it, they'll destroy it, just as they've destroyed all the other systems. The tragedy here is that no one wants to admit that they were wrong in Washington, and I suspect anywhere else. And so more Ukrainians will have to die.
How should we interpret, how should we read Zelensky's recent cabinet reshuffle? Is he repositioning himself? Is it realistic? Or is he just rebranding himself?
Well, I don't think he can do much to rebrand himself at this stage. He's on a sinking ship, and he's standing on the quarterdeck, and the waves are beginning to lap over the sides. He may find some people who, for great quantities of money, are willing to stand up and pretend to be part of something, but the truth is it's over. And now he knows he's illegitimate because the Russians have said there's been no elections. He's no longer viewed by them as legitimate. They're not going to bother talking to him anymore. So I think he's desperate, and he's going to reach out to anybody, anywhere for help and assistance.
How long can this be drawn out, Colonel? You know, we watch, well, I watch in, you know, just lingering horror. You know, you quote the death toll, you know, 600,000 dead now, and, you know, and goodness knows how many dead Russians as well. And yet the West just keeps, you know, offering up, making it possible to drag this out. You know, when is someone somewhere going to say this is immoral to keep dragging this out in this way?
Well, keep in mind that we went through the Vietnam War, and we said we killed only 250 or 300,000 Vietnamese. Ultimately, we killed 2 million. No one would admit to that travesty and that mistake. We simply packed our things and left. I suspect that's what we will do very shortly in Ukraine. The narrative is not to be questioned. The same domestic problem that you've been talking about all morning exists in foreign policy. Anyone who challenges it is tarred as some sort of evil Putinist or a foreign agent. The bottom line is this will collapse. And I think the Russians now realize they have to cross the river. They'll have to go into Kiev. And there are many who are saying it's time to go all the way to the Polish border. They don't want to, because they certainly don't want to govern any Ukrainians. I think the only possibility now is that we'll see the governments in Berlin tumble, and probably in Paris. And if that happens, you may get new leadership there, and they may be sufficiently sober to come to an arrangement in Ukraine. But otherwise, this will drag on as long as we continue to throw money into the black hole until the Russians are standing on the Polish border.
It feels, watching the United States of America, watching the political situation there, it feels as if events there are moving faster and faster. You know, surprises and upsets every day. Is any of that having a bearing? You know, is anything that's happening in Ukraine being driven by the possibility of perhaps a significant change in the White House?
That's a good question. Recently, supposedly, a proposal to end the war was floated from the Trump team. to Moscow. It doesn't seem to have had any effect because I suspect it was unrealistic. I think that the only way for this to end is for the United States to suspend any further aid, military aid whatsoever, to Ukraine. That's what we did with Vietnam. And then to evacuate all the Americans who are there, in or out of uniform, regardless of what they're doing. I think that will eventually happen, but no one wants to admit to it. But I don't think that the Russians harbor the illusion that simply a new government of any kind is going to change direction dramatically. That will never happen. It'll be a quiet but unspoken admission of complete failure, and then we'll change the subject. Remember, most Americans on any given day, Neil, don't pay attention to anything that happens beyond their borders, which is one of the reasons the ruling political elite in Washington can run around and do things. That the change now is money, monetary, financial. And a lot of people fear we're near a very great fiscal crisis, and that too could have a profound impact.
Can you think of a parallel for what we're watching at the moment? Or are the way that events in Ukraine, especially most recently, the way that these events are playing out, are we into new territory in relation to the way, proxy wars are just being prosecuted for basically the laundering of money?
Well, this is something that, quite frankly, we've practiced with the CIA and the Defense Department for many decades on a smaller scale. This is probably the most egregious example. And we're simply suffering from imperial overstretch. We have too many forces in too many places costing too much money, and we don't have the manpower to man most of the forces. And what we have in Eastern Europe is most of the United States Army, which is too small to take anything on. In the meantime, Russia has grown this enormous military establishment that is battle-hardened and ready to fight. So I think the handwriting is on the proverbial wall. It's over for us. We're going to be embarrassed. We'll get out. But unless you have an unambiguous demonstration that cannot be concealed from the American public of our weakness, and that means complete failure on the battlefield and everywhere, nothing will really change in the United States.
Colonel Douglas Macgregor, it's such an enervating, depressing story, but it's always a privilege to get your insight and to hear your common sense approach, your button-down approach to all of it. Thank you, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. I'm sure we'll speak again about this in due course.
Sure. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks as always to Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Another break, after which we'll be speaking with Dr. Ivor Cummins about what is grinding his gears at the moment. And I can tell you, Ivor and I talk often enough to know that we are simpatico in this. What grinds his gears grinds mine, if that gives you any clue.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Many happy memories, and 9 in 10 Brits say certain foods evoke feelings of childhood nostalgia, with the mousse-like powdered dessert, Angel Delight, the most loved. Joining us now.
I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, what, Angel Delight?
I'm surprised it's number one. Yes, very surprised. Well, to talk us through all of this is creator of the Crazy Sexy Food podcast, Hannah Harley-Young. Morning.
Hi. I've brought a selection of things that really define my childhood, particularly the Viennetta ice cream. And I have brought you some butterscotch Angel Delight.
Yay!
I'm going to expose myself live on camera and say that I've never tried Angel Delight.
Hannah?
I know. I don't know what that says about me.
I thought that was apple puree, actually. I'm so excited. Is it good? Here we go.
My goodness.
Did I make it okay?
Oh, yeah. But to be fair, Hannah, it's not that hard to make.
What is it though? That's what's so funny about Angel Delight. It's
chemicals. It's just chemicals in a bag.
I mean, it's a load of additives, which I mean, one thing that's also really interesting about all these nostalgic foods when you look at them is that a lot of things have been discontinued over the years.
Oh dear.
So it makes you wonder, how did this one kind of get through the cracks?
Angel Delight came out #1, didn't it?
It did come out as #1, and also sort of in the top 5 was fish and chips, something I still eat today. Fish fingers, still a staple of my diet. Mr. Whippy, in that same survey, they said that 95% of people find that a taste from their childhood will take them back more than looking at a photo. And that's something that's really interesting for me, and it's the basis of everything that I do, and the reason really why I set up Crazy Sexy Food, or one of the reasons, should I say, was that I love this concept of memories of food. You know, I've interviewed hundreds of people over the past 5 years, and when I get to that question, you actually see their face relaxing, and there's something that it evokes emotion.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. My next guest this evening is Dr. Ivor Cummins. He and I have spoken about all of the issues that have preoccupied both of us for the last several years. What we're going to talk about tonight is no exception. In part, it relates to a school book which was offered up to Irish school pupils, supposedly depicting Irish family life. Suffice to say, it's been withdrawn. Ivor, are you there with me?
Yeah, Neil, great to be here. Thank you.
I mentioned this textbook. Now, I would have thought that really around the world, many people would have an idea of Ireland as being synonymous with traditional family life. Lots of kids, lots of life centred around the home, lots of life centred around wholesome activities. But there's been a textbook out there, has there not, that's been overtly trying to propose another idea to Irish kids?
Yeah, Neil, unfortunately. I mean, there's been a fusillade of madness over the past few weeks alone in Ireland, but this is one of the things. And traditionally, Ireland had all that, but they kind of had a bit of a grip of the church over society. And when that collapsed a couple of decades ago, the globalists poured in to fill the God-shaped hole, if you will. So we've gone from one regime to the next. And this SPHE is social, political, and health indoctrination. Education. E is the education. And they've really gone too far now. And they've gotten caught red-handed. So briefly, this curriculum goes in kids 14, 15 years of age. They show a picture of a kind of twee Irish family in Aran jumpers with the kids doing Irish dancing and with hurls, the national game. The father has stains on his jumper. There's a cow looking kind of almost disgustedly over a stone wall. And it's that kind of picture, right? Very demeaning. But the paragraph that comes with this, Family A, they call it in the curriculum, is atrocious. It says they eat bacon and cabbage only. They refuse to get involved with any other cultures. They will only play their own instruments. They won't listen to any other music. Comically, it even says they won't watch RTE, the state kind of propaganda media, and they say it's all a load of rubbish. So that bit was true, but they were trying to put that in with all the other negative stereotype to say the whole lot is bad. It was denigrating. And it was racist, quite frankly. So that was Family A. But on the right, they had Family B. And Family B were all different colours of people taking selfies in front of, get this, the Colosseum. So they lathered Family B with a paragraph saying how amazing they were and they had great fun and they loved Indian food and going around the world and all of this positive stuff. And remember, they're giving this to the kids. The killer thing was they then asked the kids to list the disadvantages of Family A. And this is straight out of Mao's playbook, you know, the Cultural Revolution. You don't just feed propaganda on the people. You make them stand up and deny themselves and their families and their heritage, because there's power in making them stand up in front of the crowd and say it. They're doing that to our children. And finally, I'll finish on this and we can discuss it. They then go on, to ask the class to discuss it, but it's clear that the whole class will have to say, yes, the traditional Irish family in any guise is something we should be disgusted with and disown. So that's the class exercise. Now, it's even I'm shocked, which I find it hard to believe I'm saying. And it was exposed in the Daily Mail after X Platform mainly exposed it. A few days later, the Daily Mail did a front page blistering article and the publishers and the government rolled over immediately like the cowards they are. And it really highlights a point. If you get exposure on this madness, they rapidly roll over. You know, they don't even have any backbone.
Mr. Ivor Cummins, that is going to hopefully have teased the listening and the viewers to pick up with this conversation in the digital hour that I have coming up immediately after this. So stay with me, Mr. Ivor Cummins. But that is it for the TV hour.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Low pressure has been in charge, bringing heavy rain and thunderstorms, some localised flooding. It does stay unsettled next week, but the winds turn to a northerly direction and it turns increasingly cold, particularly by the middle of the week. Low pressure at the moment, still giving outbreaks of heavy rain across southeast Scotland, northern England, down into Wales, parts of the Midlands as well. Thundery showers across the southeast. And as we head overnight, this all slowly pushes its way eastward. Still some heavy bursts of rain possible. Drier across Northern Ireland and Scotland with a few showers here. Under the clearest skies across Scotland, temperatures dipping into single figures. Elsewhere, under the cloud and rain, holding up around 12 to 14 Celsius. So much of England and Wales starting quite cloudy, outbreaks of rain, but clearer skies across Scotland. A few showers across the Highlands and Islands, but some bright spells elsewhere. Still some thicker cloud across the southeast with some patchy rain in places. Bright skies across Northern Ireland to start Monday morning, though rather cloudy across much of England. Those sunny spells starting to develop across Wales and the West Country first thing on Monday morning. And then through the day, the bright spells across the west just slowly start to push eastwards. It does mean, though, central eastern parts of England staying cloudiest for longest. The cloud thick enough for some outbreaks of rain at times. Sunny spells across northern England, Wales, the West Country, though starting to cloud over across Northern Ireland and Scotland, with rain arriving in the west later on in the day. Temperatures cooler for all, generally near average for the time of year, 16 to 18 Celsius, perhaps locally 20 towards the southeast. Turning more unsettled on Tuesday as a weather system pushes southeastward, some outbreaks of rain, showers following.